Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're so happy to have you with us once again. We hope you all had a happy and safe Halloween. We hope you dressed up well and had some fun out there. Whether you're taking your kids out or you were out there partying and having a good time. Hopefully you had fun, remained safe, all that good stuff. I am joined by my co-host, John Sheeran, who had some fun of his own the weekend prior to Wednesday. John, you made it through, I guess, a crazy party at Ohio University, you said. So how did that go?
I don't remember much, to be honest. But the parts that I do remember.
Why not? Why not?
Oh, it might have hit my head or something.
Yeah,
who knows? Who really knows? Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you made it through. I'm glad you made it with us, and hopefully you remember some parts enough that made it fun and worth the trip for you. But I'm glad you're with us. Hey, it's the bye week. A lot of people are kind of taking a break from the Bengals, and rightfully so in a way, because this team has. I might need to go on some blood pressure medication with this team this year. They just tend to not only frustrate but make things go down to the wire. Case in point, right now, this past week 8 against the Buccaneers, they hosted Tampa Bay in basically a must-win type of game before the bye, and right at the midway point essentially, and now they've got a half a season left. Like I was saying, a lot of people are kind of taking a step back from the Bengals during the bye week here coming up on Sunday, but we are not. We are going to talk about the Bengals. We're going to talk about a number of different subjects. We'll kick it off with the Bucs, kind of some breakdown of that. We've got an interesting question of the night that we'll discuss, and we want your feedback from the live listeners and the people that are tuning in live on YouTube and or the Cincy Jungle comment threads. And then we are going to give out some mid-season awards. CincyJungle.com is giving those out as well, but John and I are going to narrow ours down and kind of whittle a handful of awards down to one person we think is the winner of each of some specific categories. And then we'll take some listener questions at the end, so you can get in touch with us on the Orange and Black Insider line, 949-542-6241. We're going to open up the phone lines later in the show, but you can text us throughout the show. But for phone calls, we're going to open that up later. So get in touch with us then, or you can hit us up on Twitter at BengalsOBI, in the live YouTube chat, or in the comment threads at Cincy Jungle with your questions. We're going to take a couple at the end of the program. John, what a whirlwind game on Sunday against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for the Bengals. A kind of a tale of two halves, and a tale of really it's who the Bengals have been this year. Very Jekyll and Hyde, very feast or famine. I guess I can start with your thoughts on the Bengals not only grabbing immense leads at some point in this game. They had a 21-point lead and two different 18-point leads. They let those evaporate. Obviously, as we know, the game got tied late in the game. Bengals came back and won on a last-second field goal by Randy Bullock. But your thoughts on not only their getting up on a team by that much, but also letting them back in. And is this just a byproduct of a quarterback change and they weren't well prepared for that?
Yeah, I think it was the Buccaneers provided a perfect storm for the Bengals in terms of they're playing a quarterback who was very turnover prone. And as we think the Bengals defense, they're basically living and dying by forcing turnovers. And combine that with the defense that was very soft up front, which allowed them to do whatever they wanted in the running game. Andy Dalton had plenty of time in the pocket to target Tyler Boyd, move the offense with big plays. So all those things, both of those things really combined to provide an explosive first half. But as we've seen in the history of Marvin Lewis, there's never a foot down the gas pedal, right? There's rarely any weeks where they really close out blowout wins and not let the team come back. And I think if Jameis Winston had been kept in the game, it wouldn't have been as close to the end of the game. But obviously, with the change of Fitzpatrick, Bengals probably weren't prepared for that, for a quarterback that was able to torch their questionable defense. And just in general, the Bengals defense isn't they're designed to bend not break, right? Because we've seen linebackers give up a ton of yards in the passing game, and when we saw a quarterback who was able to successfully read their defense and be calm and make smart decisions, they torched them, and especially with big plays down the field. So it was just that natural, in the Marvin Lewis era, a defense that doesn't really snuff out opponents. It just kind of prevents them from scoring and counting on their mistakes. And when that change in quarterback came in, it kind of disrupted all their plans. And then you had an offense who main priority, again, the Marvin Lewis trend, just don't turn the ball over when you're leading. If you win the turnover battle, you probably win the game. They had no interest in scoring in the second half. They just had an interest of trying to keep the clock moving. And when the Bucs finally figured out what they were doing, they were able to stop them the entire second half up until the last minute. And it really almost bit them in the dust for those two things. So it was just, I think it was just a matter of lack of preparation for Fitzpatrick, which I don't blame him that much, but it was just the similar tendencies that we've seen in a game where Marvin Lewis is up by multiple scores and he doesn't do enough to keep them at bay regardless of the circumstances.
Yeah, Michael Myers in the live YouTube chat says getting tired of giving up these huge leads to squeak out a close win. Sharif Willis says give DC, I'm assuming that means defensive coordinator, the axe now, referring to Terrell Austin there. Obviously kind of a big scapegoat, and rightfully so, in terms of fan ire, I guess, this year. Let's talk about the defense for a second, because, like you said, essentially utterly dominant against Jameis Winston, and then totally collapsed against Ryan Fitzpatrick. So, I mean, on one hand, the Bengals remedied a lot of different issues that plagued them in that 2-game losing streak against the Steelers and Chiefs, in that 5 sacks against Tampa Bay, 4 interceptions, one of which was a pick six. So you got to like that. But almost I think it was over 550, probably close to 600 total yards that they gave up to the Buccaneers. And that is a theme that carried over not only from the 2 losses, but basically throughout the first 8 games of the season in total. So, I mean, are you encouraged because of the big sack numbers, the interceptions? Are you encouraged that they're taking steps in the right direction? And are the yards basically a byproduct of a lot of injuries, a lot of new faces, still adjusting? Or is it, like you said, they're kind of bend, don't break, feast or famine? Is this just who they're going to be this year?
I think it is just who they are, with already a very crappy linebacker situation. And I would say that if Fitzpatrick started the whole game, they probably don't finish with 6 sacks. They definitely don't finish with 4 interceptions. The game is definitely closer. If not, the Bengals lost this game if Fitzpatrick played the whole game. But I just think that it was just that tumultuous switch at quarterback that really just turned everything on their heads, because Winston, once he started making bad mistakes, he got frazzled in the pocket, and that obviously enhanced the pass rush to do what they ended up doing. And then I really don't think that Tampa Bay had a good plan in the first half to really attack the Bengals defense, because they had so much success with just reading Winston and deciphering his decisions. And I just think that with the defense specifically, where they are right now, they don't have any linebackers as long as Nick Vigil's not out there. So they're obviously going to get torch of things over the middle. And it's just so tiresome to watch them do the same things over and over. And you just have to rely on, Jesse Bates playing out of his mind, both William Jackson and Drake Kirkpatrick, defending downfield routes, and Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins, carrying that pass rush, especially now that Carl Lawson is done for the year. I think that's a bigger loss than I think maybe some of us we're not really talking about enough, because Lawson only has 1 sack, but he's gotten many pressures, just as many as Carlos Dunlap through 8 weeks this season. So they really need to figure out how they can compensate for the lack of him. I think out of any trades that would have been plausible at the trade deadline, it would have been for an edge to compensate for that, because I don't think Jordan Willis is ready yet. I like what Sam Hubbard has done flashes, but he's not ready to provide that consistency that Lawson did. I think that's honestly going to be a bigger issue than what we maybe haven't been talking about.
Well, you, my friend, are the king of the segue and the king of previewing what we'll be talking about in just a little bit here. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We are we are breaking down the Bengals win against the Buccaneers, a much-needed win for the Bengals as they head into the bye. You can get this program on iTunes, on Art19, on YouTube, on CincyJungle.com. We're also on Stitcher and the Google Play app. So check out our content on all of that stuff, and we appreciate all the support. Subscribe to our channels. We really appreciate the support that we've received for this program and some of the changes that this program has gone through over the past couple of years. But we're growing and we're doing a lot of new and cool stuff. So but still staying true to our roots. So pretty stoked on that. Continuing on with the Buccaneers talk just for a little bit longer, John, you mentioned the loss and injury. That's kind of where I was going to go next. Just maybe expand on the loss there of, his not being in the lineup. You kind of mentioned you're not too sure about Willis and Hubbard at this point. I guess, and even more big picture, you got Lawson done for the year, Eifert done for the year, Croft has been out for a long time, Vigil has been out for a long time, Giovanni Bernard has been out for a long time. The Bengals missed Joe Mixon for a little while. We don't know what's going on with AJ Green. We thought it was minor, and now it's kind of getting to be a little bit of a gray area there. I'm pretty sure he'll be okay, but if it ends up being a turf toe thing, that can linger. Mm-hmm. The Bengals, you hate to have that excuse, but they have really been hit hard by the injury bug, and Lawson is kind of the most recent example of that.
Yeah, I was scared of commenting about it would be so typical if AJ Green's injury ended up being like Billy Price's, where we just thought it was.
I didn't even mention Billy Price. Yeah. That's another one. Yeah.
I didn't want to say it to jinx it, but I guess it's still on the table. I guess, and obviously Tyler Boyd can't carry the receiving corps, so if AJ Green's not out there, it's obviously a giant issue. But bye week came at a perfect time. Obviously, we should be getting Price back into the lineup. We should be getting Gio back into, maybe Nick Vigil the week after that, maybe Tyler Croft the week after that. All of those would be tremendous additions to the lineup, and I think they've done a decent job of getting the guys in that they can. Obviously, those guys are talented, and it's nice when it's next man up, except quoting Joe Goodberry here, when the next man kind of sucks. And that was really the case with the linebackers. I think Evans played well, has played well in not only Burfict's stead, but also Vigil's stead. But he's still probably not at this point a starting caliber linebacker, even though he's kind of like a young Vincent Ray. I think of him more like more athletic and younger Vincent Ray, where he racks up a lot of tackles, but maybe not as aggressive in his run fits as you would like him to be. And just going back to Lawson again, I wonder if this is going to change how they rotate with the defensive line, because we saw Adolphus Washington get a lot of snaps inside, and therefore Hubbard getting a lot of snaps outside. Maybe that's the new nickel. Maybe you have Washington go inside, Hubbard taking Lawson's place on the outside, leaving Willis to rotate in with Johnson at base. Obviously, Johnson's going to be naturally on the field longer, and I don't think that's obviously anything good to write home about. They need guys to step up there. I like what I've seen from Washington. I think he had his first sack with the Bengals against the Bucs. He needs to bring a decent pass rushing presence, but as long as Atkins and Dunlap keep at the pace that they're on, which there's no reason to think that they aren't, pass rush should be okay. I think they're a top 10 unit in PFF's grading system. And with the secondary, hopefully Drake Patrick's issue isn't too bad, because we've kind of dogged on him on this program, but in all fairness, statistically, he has been all right in the past 4 games. So it's nice that not only Darius Phillips, though obviously Kavari Russell has gotten snaps, but you'd like to see your starting quarterbacks out there as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to look at some of the guys that are out there from a defensive end perspective in terms of free agents, and there's just not really many out there. You mentioned a second ago about the trade deadline and all that kind of stuff, and the Bengals could have maybe swung a trade for a defensive end or an edge rusher, and they didn't do that. So we can talk more about that in a second. Kind of wrapping a bow a little bit on the Buccaneers game, John. Are you encouraged for the final 8 games coming up down the stretch, or are you kind of sitting here going, this I'm legitimately sitting at a craps table and I have no idea what's going to happen here?
Yeah, and at the end of the second half, like I tweeted out, like, you know, we can enjoy, because I thought at the time that they were going to win by a lot, and I was saying like we can enjoy this win while recognizing that there's still legitimate issues, and then those legitimate issues creeped up in the second half, and you're like, okay, well, this is a win, but we can't really treat it as like a step in the right direction, because they did a lot of things that they've done this season good wise, and then the bad things kind of crept up when they got a better quarterback in there. And that's kind of the nature of this league, right? If you don't have the better quarterback playing for your team, odds are you're going to lose, especially if you have a coach who's pretty stubborn in his schematics and his philosophies and all that stuff. So as long as the Bengals are playing a team, you know, Drew Brees is going to be tough against the Saints. Obviously playing Ben Roethlisberger again, Phillip Rivers is going to be tough. There's just a lot of good quarterbacks left on the schedule, and the defense can't continue to allow 500 yards and expect Andy Dalton to match it week after week, because they're not going to play the Bucs every single week. And it was nice that they scored a lot of points against the Bucs. So that's kind of what we should have expected them to do against a defense that bad, but it's the same issues that have plagued them. And even if they did win, there's still prevalent issues that there should be major concerns about.
Right. And, you know, we talk about these comeback wins and how they, you know, how they've come back, and yeah, you got to like what you saw out of the team against Tampa in terms of they just kind of slouched a little bit, and then you know, they came back at the end and kicked the field goal. They came back against the Steelers, but the other kind of Miami's a decent team. You know, they kind of came back against them. The Falcons, I mean, they're kind of underachieving a little bit this year. They came back against them, so you're kind of sitting here going, well, I mean, yeah, they've got some nice wins, but how high of quality are the opponents that some of these some of these comeback wins are? Last question for you about the Buccaneers game, and then we'll move on. It seems to me, and I think I've seen some things from maybe our friend Josh Kirkendall and maybe Joe Goodberry as well, but it seems to me that the third quarter for this team is awful, especially the offense. I don't know what that is. That was very much on display against Tampa Bay. They started off the second half with 4 straight 3-and-outs. And then their 5th possession, they got, I think, 1 first down, punted the ball away. And then I think their 6th possession was the one where they drove down and kicked the winning field goal. So thank God for Jesse Bates' pick 6, because, you know, this could be we're talking about a different outcome basically at that point. I want to talk about 2 facets about the third quarter offense and some of the offensive line play and all of that. Number one, is that just a lack of adjustments by Bill Lazor in the team? Number 2, is that you in your weekly lineman piece at Cincy Jungle, you noted that Trey Hopkins has played, or at least last week played very well at center. You mentioned Billy Price probably will be coming back after the bye. Clint Bowling left the Tampa Bay game with a back injury. Christian Westerman entered. I mean, is there a shuffling of the line, and how big of the impact was Bowling being out in terms of contributing to those third quarter woes? And do you see a Price Hopkins starting lineup being the best viable option? And do you think the Bengals will do that?
So I think both these questions kind of intertwine with each other. Something that I've noticed specifically with the Ravens and the Buccaneers game is that both games started off with offensive explosion, thinking that's going to be a blowout, and then something kind of switched in the second half. And you mentioned halftime adjustments, and as we all know as Bengals fans, they don't exist. They're just journalism. So I don't know what you're talking about.
They don't exist.
So I think that there have been adjustments made by both the Ravens, and I'm just sticking at those 2 defenses, but it has been with other defenses as well. There's been a change in the protection with the first half and second half of the Bengals offensive line. I think in both of the games specifically, both defenses got a lot more creative in their pass rushes. They utilized a lot more stunts, delayed blitzes, twists, linebackers rushing off a 2-point stance. They kind of confuse the Bengals offensive line when you have guys like Bobby Hart and Alex Redmond, who have given up a crap ton of pressures this year. And even Cordy Glenn had a rough stretch in the middle of the first half of the season. They kind of showed their flaws a little bit and ended up Dalton with under more pressure, and as we've seen with him, once he gets flustered, it's kind of hard for him to kind of bounce back. And then coupled that with the fact that, yeah, Lazer's done some good things, but there's also it's just been him, going with a 15-play script in the beginning of the game, and then not much has really changed after that. It doesn't really evolve as the game goes on. Defenses start to pick up on it, and I think when defenses are noticing what they're doing, getting more surprising and creative with their pressure packages, and just recognizing what the Bengals are doing, leads to stalls, and it's up to either Laser or Dalton to kind of recognize, hey, they're changing things up. We need to change things up too, because if they don't, then second halves like the Bucks can happen, and maybe in another game, a quarterback of Ryan Fitzpatrick's caliber is playing the entire game, and instead of giving up a comeback, they're getting blown out of the water like they did against Kansas City.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see. It sounds like, based on our buddy Jeff Hobson over at Bengals.com, it sounds like Hopkins will be. What's that?
Yeah, and I think what we've heard is that Price is coming back to center. So I do think that Hopkins and Price at center right guard is the best, but I think we're going to end up seeing Price and Redmond at center right guard.
Yeah, and you gotta Hopkins hasn't been outstanding his entire tenure in relief of Price, but he's been serviceable, if not a little bit more so. He's better than Russell Bodine. Which I could probably be better than Russell Bodine, but you have to give a tip of the cap to Trey Hopkins, because technically center is not his primary position. He's a guard by trade, and he played pretty decent in absence of Billy Price, and that now has to come back and say, okay, well, why not Price Hopkins on the middle right side of the line, and kind of keep going from there. Alex Redmond has given up, like you said, a lot of pressures, but it sounds like from Bengals.com and Marvin Lewis's recent talk with the media that is not in the cards. It sounds like Price is going back to center, and there's been no mention of if Hopkins will be inserted in the lineup over Alex Redmond, but I don't think that's happening.
Yeah.
This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. And we're talking Bengals football on the bye week just after Halloween. We hope you had a good Halloween and holiday there. You can get this program on iTunes. We're on YouTube. We're on the Google Play and Stitcher apps. We're also on Art19. You can get all of our stuff on CincyJungle.com. So get our stuff, subscribe, check it out. We appreciate it. We're going to segue now into one small topic and then our question of the night, John. I guess I'll start with, should the Bengals have traded or made a trade for a receiver, an edge rusher, or do you say, you know what, even with the injuries, guys are coming back, this team is 5-3, the sky is not falling. Where do you stand on this?
Yeah, even if Tyler Kroft comes back, your two tight ends going forward are CJ Uzomah and Tyler Kroft, who's just coming back from injury. I think that they definitely could have made a play for a guy like Jared Cook, or our own Matt Minich of Cincy Jungle wrote a good article about some potential pass rushers that could have been on the market, could have been looking for some second life in the back half of their careers. Any of them will probably be better than Jordan Willis. And there's this fascination, man, with Bengals fans and late round draft picks, just because they've gotten in the past Geno Atkins, Carl Lawson, Marvin Jones, Iloka, just to name a couple. Like those picks are important. Like not every day 3 pick is important. And you saw trades like Demaryius Thomas, like a 4th and the next year's 7th, and I think Ty Montgomery was like a next year's 7th as well. There are valuable assets out there who don't cost an arm and a leg. And you don't have to keep all of your day 3 picks. The hit rate for day 3 picks is not that high. It just like the only day 3 pick that's contributing right now to the Bengals roster is for this year's class is Darius Phillips, and he's a good player, but they drafted like 7 guys in the last 3 rounds, and like half of them aren't even on the roster right now. So I do think that, yes, there were some players on the market that could have helped them right now. If this team was truly in win now, those veterans would have been worth the 1 or 2, low risk, low potential assets that they instead kept for, for either next year or the year after that. I do think that they should have been in the market for a trade, and the fact that they weren't even interested in anything, I think it's just a slap in the face of what they actually meant by win now.
Right. And I'm gonna make our listeners do a little work, because you can go on last week's show and we talked about all of the compensatory picks of recent drafts. I think in the Andy Dalton, AJ Green era, we listed all of those guys, and I mean there's nothing there. There's nothing there. And those are usually day 3 picks, if not even second day picks if you get them at the end of the 3rd round. So you would think that they would be willing to do that. You mentioned Demaryius Thomas. That's a guy whose numbers rival AJ Green.
Mm-hmm.
Very consistent football player. Yeah, he's had some problems with drops, but 1,000-yard receiver almost every year he's been in the league. He had Peyton Manning for a good chunk of his career, but he also had Tim Tebow and other guys, Case Keenum, Brock Osweiler, all kinds of different players go through Denver. So, I mean, and you're talking about a guy who may or may not be Hall of Fame discussion type of guy for a 3rd-round pick, and you go, wow, okay. Then you got the Rams, the best team in the league, who have a dominant defensive front, and they go and get Dante Fowler from the Jags. So the rich get richer there. I mean, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm kind of with you, John, where I say, look, man, I mean, we're not asking for the world here, but you've got some issues at tight end. You've got now issues at defensive end. You've got issues at wide receiver. Why not? Why not do something where, I mean, it costs you maybe a 4th-round pick, a 5th-round pick? I mean, I don't know. It shows not only that they're proactive to improving their roster, they're proactive in saying, hey, we are close. We're 5-3. We have issues, but we can improve, and we can go get a guy right now. And they still sat on their hands, and this team, for all the things we think that things have changed with this team. And yeah, there's been maybe a few more little changes that Marvin wrestled away from Mike Brown in his contract this year. This is still very familiar territory. And if you were to probably ask, I guarantee you, if you were to probably ask Marvin Lewis and or Mike Brown as to, well, why didn't you make a move at the trade deadline? Well, you could have got a guy. Well, we traded already. We made our trade for Cordy Glenn. That's exactly where they would point. And I've been around this team long enough where they go, well, what about this guy over here? What about this guy? Why aren't you active in free agency? Well, we got Preston Brown. Well, we got, that's they start pointing to that stuff instead of saying, you know what? That's not enough. That's
the bare minimum. The bare minimum.
Yep, that's not enough. And so I think they could have done something. I don't think they needed to, get a franchise player, but I think they could have got a veteran rental deal on somebody for whatever that could help them out for these 8 games and help them move forward. So that being said, this is our question of the night, John. And again, hindsight is a beautiful thing. And looking back now into the previous 8 weeks, this is where we're going with this. The name, well, there's a couple of different players, especially in this recent era of Bengals football, the 2011 through 2018 team, where fans have been very anti a small handful of players. Brandon Tate was one of them. Russell Bodine was one of them. And some were, especially this year, anti-Brandon LaFell. Brandon LaFell was cut during training camp because this young wide receiver group behind AJ Green showed so much promise, and they wanted to shave a little salary to make a trip. Oh no, they didn't do that. They didn't use the salary for Brandon LaFell on anybody. But well, I guess they use that salary for extensions and whatnot. Fine, whatever. But now you look at it, right? Tyler Boyd's having a great season. AJ Green's having a great season. We kind of figured Green would be his usual self. Boyd, we thought would be okay, but he's been far better than that. But John Ross hurt, getting absolutely nothing from Josh Malone and Cody Core. Alex Erickson, minimal impact on offense. He's having a pretty good year at special teams, especially on kickoff returns, but minimal impact on offense. You've had injuries at tight end. everybody's favorite guy, Alden Tate. Obviously, the Bengals didn't think as highly of him as the fans did from the preseason, and other teams didn't think as highly of him because he cleared waivers after the Bengals cut him. Now you look at it and you go, well, maybe LaFell, and AJ Green is now suffering an injury. LaFell, not a game breaker guy, but had a handful of decent games and big plays for the Bengals. Now you look at it and you go, should have hung on to that guy through the rest of his contract, which was just this year? Just now that the injury bug and all these issues coming up, was it a mistake that they let him go?
I'm going to say no, because I think that the Bengals needed to see what John Ross was, and had they kept LaFell, they wouldn't have given Ross the chance to make the mistakes and get himself injured, multiple times again. But in that same facet, you wouldn't have gotten the good plays that John Ross has given them, and they were important plays in his presence. Yeah. He has been on the field. So I think in that sense, yeah, I think that letting go LaFell was important. You also had to give Malone the chance to step up. Obviously, he hasn't done anything close to that. And maybe if Tyler Boyd hadn't, broken out as well as he has, this is a different conversation, because Boyd's impact on this offense can't be praised enough, because what he's been doing is just very impressive. The production speaks for itself. He's already had a Brandon LaFell type season in just 8 games, which is nothing short of incredible for him, especially where he was at this time last season. I think that what he's done is commendable. And it's part of the reason why, LaFell, even with just Boyd and Green as your only viable options, LaFell probably wouldn't do a lot regardless. I think he only has 3 catches on the season with Oakland. I think he only has stats in 1 game. And that offense, how much in flux it is with that, it kind of brings up questions like what exactly is he doing in Oakland at this point in the season? So I think it was just a case of, they needed to make those mistakes. They needed to at least try something different in order to see where they are right now. And at this point, there could have been a time for, a potential midseason acquisition or a trade or some type of change in that sense. But Brandon LaFell not being in the equation at this point, I don't think hurts them that much as compared to had they kept him on. How much different would the offense look at this point, and would it probably be worse? I think that's probably the reality that we would have been looking at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that you don't want to have, you invest all this capital in a John Ross, a Tyler Boyd, and Malone. I mean, some relatively high picks in these guys, or sometimes a very high pick in these guys, and you want to see them get out there, and you want to see them contribute and grow, and a lot of times the way they do that is to actually get game snaps. Boyd has flourished. And I think that he showed a lot already in training camp where they were like, you know what, he's our number 2 guy. And, then they also said, well, Ross looks better. And all of a sudden, LaFell, who was your number 2, is now your number 4. And you're going, okay, we're paying millions of dollars for a number 4 wide receiver. Doesn't really make sense. But the reason I brought this up again, we can sit here and I'm sure people are going, what? Anthony, you're crazy. Why are you even talking about Brandon LaFell right now? The reason I bring this up, he was pretty comfortable in the system. He was an okay player for the Bengals and stepped up a couple of times for them in the past couple of seasons. The reason I bring it up, though, is because of the myriad of injuries to the wide receiver and tight end position and the lack of contributions from the back end. I think the Bengals, and they should have bet on the young guys, because at some point look, we've always knocked Marvin Lewis about, hey, dude, you're not playing the young guys who seem to be better than some of these veteran guys that are just okay. But I guess it's the hindsight thing, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at what's happened to those 2 position groups and you go, well, I mean, it kind of might be nice to have a veteran guy that, with Ross out of the lineup. I mean, you've seen what this offense has looked like. Yeah, they had a nice 2 quarters against Tampa Bay, but really, with Ross out of the lineup, defenses are really keying on AJ Green even more. Mm-hmm. Boyd had a lot of trouble against Kansas City doing anything, as did everybody on the Bengals. But Ross makes a difference just being out there, even as a decoy. I think we can all see that. But he's injured often, and the other guys just haven't been able to do anything to help out. Now, some of this may also be on Andy Dalton in terms of, he's really comfortable with AJ. He's really comfortable with Boyd. He was really comfortable with Eifert, and that's just where he's kind of looking. And then also the running backs, Mixon and Gio when they're in there. But I don't know. I wish if they weren't going to maybe make a trade for a veteran guy, a bigger name, a Golden Tate, a Demaryius Thomas, someone like that to come and be a Band-Aid type of player, you would hope that they would have hung on to somebody that you can get, okay, you can say like, hey, this guy is here. We can, get him a little bit. We can kind of hang on to a little bit of the offense behind Green and Boyd. But I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting topic. I was thinking about him. Yes, you look at LaFell's stats, it's basically all in last week's game against the Colts. He did have a touchdown reception last week against the Colts, 3 catches, and you go, okay, ring-a-ding-ding. But obviously he would have had a bigger impact if he was to hang on to the Bengals, even as a number 4 guy. But just an interesting food for thought now that the Bengals are banged up, other guys aren't contributing, and the trade deadline passed and the Bengals didn't do anything to get a wide receiver to help him out. Got a lot of questions in the YouTube chat. We'll get to those in just a few minutes. On our listener questions, you can call or text in. We're going to hold off on the calls till the end of the show, but 949-542-6241. We are taking texts at the moment, so if you want to text your question in, you can do that. Otherwise, I'll give you the little heads up on when we're taking calls. We've got another segment before we do that, but get in touch with us. We want to hear from you. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get this show on iTunes, on YouTube. You can get it on cincyjungle.com, on Stitcher, and the Google Play app. And did I say cincyjungle.com? I think I did.
Yeah, Art19?
Art19. That was the one I forgot. How could I forget that? Art19. That's why you're the man, John. You help me when my brain fails me, so I appreciate it. So yeah, get the program on all those outlets and subscribe to the program. We appreciate it. John, let's give out some midseason awards.
Let's do it.
All right. Let's start with, I guess, drum roll. Let's start with breakout player. And I guess I'm going to start there because I actually wrote this post for cincyjungle.com. And the guys I nominated, a couple of which are rookies, a couple of guys are third-year players, and I think I had one second-year player in there. So I'm going to give you my nominees, and you're welcome to choose from one of them. Or if you got somebody else you want to nominate or give – well, if you got somebody else in mind that you would like to give the award to, then go for it. I had Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon, Jesse Bates III, Sam Hubbard, and Andrew Billings are my 5 nominees. And breakout player, kind of you figure the criteria is guy's a younger guy, probably either hasn't had a lot of experience or in the experience they've had with the Bengals hasn't done much, but this year they've really stepped up. So your choice, whether it's those 5 or somebody else for breakout player at the midseason point for the Bengals.
So I think we both are going to have the same answer. So I'm just going to throw out my personal nomination for someone who I think deserves to be mentioned. And I think it is Trey Hopkins, because I think center, wasn't his natural position. He only played there once in college. But I got to tell you, man, just in the 6.5 games that he's there, most of the time he just looks very, very natural. And it really makes me think how different the whole offseason would have been had they have tried Hopkins at center in the Bodine era, and just how much better he would have been there compared to where he is right now had he gotten experience there before. But obviously seeing Billy Price, but seeing how Trey Hopkins has come in and produced one of the best games at center against Tampa Bay that we've seen from a Bengals center in such a long time, I think it's worthy of at least of a nomination. But I think the clear answer is Boyd, just compared to where he was last year and where he is now as one of the upper echelon number 2 receivers in the NFL, an ideal complement to AJ Green, truly the next generation of TJ Hushmanzama. I think Hushmanzama. It's like I think I just mixed CJ Uzama in there. But yeah, I think, it's got to be Boyd.
Who's your mama? TJ, who's your mama? Right. Yeah, really good call on Hopkins, and I have another award post that's going to come out that he is going to be nominated for. Yeah, I think I got to go with you with Boyd. I do want to say Mixon. It's easy because Mixon was already kind of, you saw some things last year. He contributed a little more heavily last year to the offense than Boyd. When I say Mixon, the thing to me is the yards per carry. Difference. And yeah, you can look at the offensive line for that, but he was at 3.5 for the season last year, and he's at 4.8 this year. That's a huge difference. That is a huge difference. And it seems as if it's like every time the Bengals line up out of shotgun and give him a draw play or a counter play out of shotgun, he gets anywhere from 6 to 9 yards. It's crazy. So you gotta like that from him. He's going to be on pace to. He's on pace to break 1,000 yards, and he should get more carries. And then I think just with Giovanni Bernard coming back, I think that tandem is really going to just help the offense going forward. Those guys have barely played together this year.
Right.
They've been hurt at different times. So, getting those guys back and playing together, I think is going to help a lot. But I'm going to go with Boyd for the reasons you said. And he's basically first or second in all the major receiving categories for the team. He's second on the team with touchdown receptions with 5, and second with yards and with 620. And then he's first on the team in receptions with 49. Both he and Green are on pace for 1,000-yard seasons and double-digit touchdown seasons. That would be pretty awesome if they could both do that. Obviously, it would be even more awesome if it means that they made the playoffs because of it. But if they both can get 1,000 yards and double-digit touchdowns, that's a pretty special season from your top 2 receivers. So I will go with Tyler Boyd as well for the breakout player at midseason point. I see a lot of agreement in the live YouTube chat as well. Let's move on to, I guess we'll go with unsung hero. This is one of the ones I also do weekly for the team. Unsung hero for the season or for the midseason point. Usually this is for guys that step up in the wake of injury and play well, or guys that just go and they play well and they just go unnoticed because of the position they play, or there's a star. For instance, if it's Boyd, just AJ Green gets a lot of the praise and whatever, but Boyd kind of gets overlooked a little bit sometimes. But usually for me, this is usually a lineman or a backup player that has come in and played in a more prominent role to play well. For me, I will go with your choice, John. I'm going to say Hopkins for this one. I think he deserves the nod as unsung hero, playing an important position at center, playing it pretty well, and stepping in for Billy Price. And there really hasn't been much of a dip at all in terms of what the offense was doing with Price and with him.
Okay. Hopkins is a good choice. For the sake of diversity, I'll go with somebody a little bit different. I'm going to go with Darius Phillips. And I'm not tremendously confident in that answer, but I just feel like with the nature of what happened at the position, Darkwood Denard went out. They weren't like, they only had Tony McRae behind him, and Phillips is obviously like last measure. But just in the past few games, didn't really get targeted a lot up until the Tampa Bay game, where he was kind of had some bad moments down the field. But just in the minimal plays that he's been out there the first 2 games, he made a lot of impact plays, made a lot of solid tackles at the line of scrimmage, and just hasn't really had any bad moments, I guess. And it's kind of where I was with also Nick Vigil, who was up until he was injured, playing extremely well, was by far their best linebacker, even with Vontaze Burfict on the field. He would have been probably my answer had he had been staying healthy throughout the season. But just for the sake of what the award is, I'm going to go, for the sake of diversity, Darius Phillips, who I think is playing pretty solid for a 5th-round pick, 3rd on the depth chart at the position.
Okay. I like it. So you've got Darius Phillips as the unsung hero. I have Trey Hopkins. Let's move on to Rookie of the Year. And this is probably a two-horse race, if that. Who do you have for Rookie of the Year? I think I know where you're probably going to go.
1, 2, 3. Bates.
Bates.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, he's balling out. He's playing like one of the best safeties period in the league. Just everything that was great about him in Wake Forest has been exemplified in the Bengals defense. He hasn't truly been a true free safety. He's been more of that split two high safety look, but just in terms of covering ground, playing with instincts, playing the ball very well. He's just been everything as advertised. You know, their decision to move on from Georgia Loca for him has obviously paid off, and he's probably a legitimate defensive rookie of the year candidate at this point.
Yeah, he's been. If you're a big PFF guy, he was their AFC Defensive Rookie of the Month for October, and he was a midseason All-Pro by their standards. I did have on him. He leads the team in tackles. He co-leads the team in interceptions with 3. And, you know, he had the big pick 6 last week, so you got to like what you've seen from him. I'm going to say this, though, okay? I've seen a lot of, and I don't know if it's Austin, I don't know if it's Bates, I don't know if it's Sean Williams, who, by the way, Sean Williams, statistically speaking, has had a nice season as well.
Yeah, sure.
Co-leader with interceptions with 3 and has forced fumble, I think a sack. He was enormous in that Ravens win. He was absolutely huge in that game. But there seems to still be a lot of miscommunication and a lot of big plays given up between the cornerbacks, the safeties, a lot of guys getting beat deep. Bates has been around the ball a lot. He's got a lot of defended passes, a lot of interceptions so far, but that's the one thing where I kind of go, well, okay, that's where I kind of disagree a little bit with Pro Football Focus in their metrics, but you know, it's probably not all him in terms of that miscommunication or those big plays. Sometimes they're not even his guy to guard, but I just would like to see that shored up, obviously, as the year goes on. And he's a young guy; he'll learn a little bit more. I think Aloka and Williams played well just because they played with each other for so long. You know, they played well together. Obviously, Aloka and Reggie Nelson played very well together. So it just takes time to build a little bit of that chemistry. But I'd like to see that going forward. But yeah, Bates is there, and then you know, you got Hubbard contributing and some other guys, but Bates should be the clear-cut guy there. Before we kind of get to the MVPs, John, I got a weird one for you, and this is kind of going to be off the cuff, so I hope I don't throw you for too much of a loop here. But let's do play of the year so far. The biggest play of the year at the midseason point, and there are a lot to choose from. I don't think there's really a wrong answer here, unless you say like something against the Chiefs, you know, a play against the Chiefs. But yeah, let's go play of the year.
I'm gonna go with Joe Mixon's 43-yard run against the Bucs, because for the first time in a while, I jumped out of my seat from a block made by the Bengals, and it was Trey Hopkins on the move, just destroying a linebacker. And also on that play, I think Clint Bowling got in front. Unfortunately, got injured, and it was a play he twisted his back a little bit, but some great blocks made down the field. And I think Mixon forced more tackles on that run than he had the entire season. And it also he also crossed the century mark for rushing yards, which was like the first time a Bengals running back has done that in the first half since Cedric Benson did it like a decade ago. And I'm really only answering this because that's how far back my memory has gone for plays. But no, that play was exciting and did a lot of things that made me excited about, you know, the players that were out there. And unfortunately, Bowling got hurt on it, but it did a lot of good things, and I think it led to AJ Green scoring a touchdown the very next play.
Yeah, there's a lot to choose from here. I mean, you could say, I mean, a number of AJ Green plays. You can say a number of Tyler Boyd plays. You could sit here and say, you know, Bates pick 6 last week was a gigantic play. I'm torn between 2. I am torn between Andy Dalton, AJ Green touchdown against Atlanta to win the game. With just a couple of seconds left. That's kind of obvious, I guess. But that play is something that the Bengals that's not something that happens to the Bengals often. And on the road and a game where you're like, wow, you know, the team had been struggling the past couple of years. You needed to kind of keep this momentum going. And, you know, that You got to like that. So that was one. And then I guess the other that I thought was gigantic was the Michael Johnson interception return against Miami. Number one, I have a soft spot for Michael Johnson, the guy. I think he's a great human being, and has been a good Bengal player in terms of just locker room guy and just a good guy that they've hung on to for a variety of reasons. Not necessarily the stat leader guy, but a solid guy. Maybe not the past couple of years, but solid contributor for the team throughout a good portion of his career. But anyway, again, another game the Bengals needed, AFC win. They were facing the Steelers the next week, and they needed to get that win to, keep pace and all of that stuff. Nothing was working on offense that day, and that was the play. There was a couple, Mixon had a nice, touchdown catch that was, almost a little fluky in that game. But that was the play that kind of turned not only that game, but all of a sudden it was kind of like, wow, this team's finding creative ways to win. And, it got them to, what was it, 4-1, I think, at the point. Yeah. So those are my two nominees for the two biggest plays. I
did the biggest double take watching that play. It was definitely
it was hard to figure out what was happening when you watched it live. It was like, what the heck just happened? So that's interesting. Yeah, and then Jason Bonstein says the Sam Hubbard touchdown against Miami, really good one also from Chris Berrien. The Fedulum Colts game, the fumble recovery. That started the season with an exclamation point as well. So, like I said, not many bad answers here. That's kind of where we're going. Zachary Stemple said, I really like the Williams strip sack against Baltimore. So we're kind of running up against time a little bit, John. Let's just go offensive MVP and defensive MVP at this point. Your defensive MVP is?
Geno Atkins. Just dominant. He was on pace for Aaron Donald early on. He kind of dropped off a little bit when they were in that 2-game skid, but he's as dominant as ever, and he carries the defense at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Hasn't been in the sack column the past 3 weeks, I believe, but this last week, I think he forced 3 holding penalties. He had 5 pressures or something. I mean, he was silly. And I think even though he didn't get those sacks, he allowed those 5 sacks to happen this last week. So, yeah, still great. I wish there was some consistency around him, both as pass rushers and at Andrew Billings' spot. I think Billings has improved from last year, but still not greatly improved. So, he gets a little more help. I think it'll even help his game out. But he's doing his thing. Offensive MVP, John. This can go a number of different ways.
I think it's Dalton. And I went back and forth between him and Boyd for a little bit, but I'm just thinking about how better this offense is because of Dalton's newfound consistency. And it's something that we've talked about earlier in the season on the show. And it's just something that we just haven't been used to. But as long as we could just be comfortable that Dalton is not going to completely collapse during a game, as long as it's not in prime time or whatever. But I just think that Laser hasn't been as good as everyone is making him out to be. But despite that, I think Dalton is finally just relaxing into what he is, and he's just playing at a level that is sustainable for the Bengals, and it's partly why the offense has been able to, pull out games even when their defense hasn't been doing as well. And it's a quarterback league, and when he's not playing tremendous compared to other quarterbacks in the league, there's been a passing boom this year alone. But I just think he's playing at a very high level with a lot of injuries around him, and relatively high level, I guess. So I'm gonna have to say him just because of those circumstances.
Yes, he has played well. Probably, I would say to me, this 8-game stretch, I would say that this is probably the second best stretch of a season we've seen from Andy Dalton, going back to 2015, obviously being the highest. Now he's 13th in the league in passing yards, and it's a very slim margin between him and number 8. 8 through 13 are very, very close. Actually, 8 through 16 are very, very close. So he's 13th there, but in touchdown passes, he is, where is he at? He's 3rd in the league. in touchdown passes with 17. Only Andrew Luck and Patrick Mahomes have more touchdown passes than Andy Dalton. Now, Jared Goff, Phillip Rivers are tied with him. Tom Brady is one behind him. But 17 touchdown passes through 8 games. That's over 2 a game. That's not bad.
That's 4 games without Eifert, who like really inflated his touchdown total in 2015.
Yep. And really, like we said, without a lot of guys, without Ross, without Eifert, without Croft. Croft was a guy who had 6 or 7 touchdowns last year as well. So, without a lot of guys, still at times average to maybe slightly above average offensive line, probably average at best, with times being below average. So, he's getting it done. It's hard. I want to give it to AJ Green because AJ Green has been doing some immense things. Basically helped to carry the offense in the Ravens win, helped to carry the offense, and big touchdown against Tampa Bay, the game-winning touchdown against Atlanta. I'm tempted to go with him, but I guess since Andy Dalton is playing pretty well at the moment, I will give it to him. And still wish he had played better against Kansas City, but he played, statistically speaking, he played pretty decent against Pittsburgh, a team he does not play very well against, and he played well last week in some weird weather. So I'll give it to him. I'll go with you as well, Andy Dalton with AJ Green right behind him. So those are some of our mid-season Bengals awards. There's going to be a series full of a bunch of different ones on cincyjungle.com, so keep it there. And you can vote on yours. You can sound off on yours, and let everybody know who you think and how wrong we are about who we picked on some of these. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. You can get this show, as I've mentioned, on Art19 at cincyjungle.com, on iTunes, on YouTube, and on Stitcher and Google Play. You can get them on a bunch of different – no excuses. You can get it on a lot of different stuff. So get it, subscribe, and we so appreciate you guys tuning in. Every time we do this episode, we appreciate the live listeners. We appreciate the subscribers who check us out later and all of that. We're going to get out of here with just a couple of listener questions. We've gone a little longer than we thought, but we did get some listener questions. We do have some time maybe for a call or two and or some texts. So if you want to get in, 949-542-6241, we'll try and get to you. We do have a question on Twitter, though, John. There is a question from our good friend Sam Anger, and he is across the pond in the UK. He says, "Hey lads," so you can tell he's from the UK. Hey lads. Sorry, I lost it here. One sec. Hey lads, hope you're doing well. Question for Anthony. Well, let's start with yours because he has one for me and one for you. Let's start with yours, John. Question for John. Do you think William Jackson III is struggling with Austin's system? If so, do you think it's a lull?
Perhaps, I guess. I don't think Austin's scheme directly impacts the way Jackson has been suspect to double moves that he has. I think that's kind of been an issue going back to last year with him, specifically against T.Y. Hilton. That's like the most glaring example. But I think what a lot of people wanted to see from him is, following that team's best receiver. And I'm not sure that's a great idea in the sense that guys are lining up a lot more in the slot. And I don't think that he has the hips to really handle shifty guys in the slot. So maybe, perhaps, but I just think that Jackson was kind of going through the motions early on in the season. But the past 3 or 4 games, he's been playing very good, almost to the level that he was at last year. So I think he was just kind of in a rough patch against very good competition. But I think he's coming back, and I don't think it has a lot to do with what Austin is doing on as the play caller.
Yeah, I agree, and I think, and you might have touched on this a little bit here, but when the Bengals drafted Jackson, it was under Gunther, and Gunther likes those press man, leave a guy out on the island type of thing. And that's just not too much of that's not so much what Austin is preaching. We've got a call on the line here, and we'll get to a question here. So hang tight one sec, John. Hey, it's the Orange and Black Insider. Who's this?
Aaron from Cincy.
Aaron?
Yeah, Aaron.
Hey, how you doing, bud?
Doing all right, man. Thanks for asking. I just had a question. I've been thinking about this for quite some time, even more so lately with our defense playing. I'm not really sure about while I love guys like Geno Atkins and Carlos Dunlap and whatnot, I think the league is kind of evolving in a way where it's really hard to have impact players at defensive tackle position. And it just, it makes me feel sometimes like with all the rules with hitting the quarterback and how mobile they're getting and how fast they're getting rid of the ball, I just feel like a lot of our impact players on defense that are on the defensive line, I just don't know how sustainable that's going to be going forward with the league going like it is right now. And I was just seeing what you guys want to talk about that or had any thoughts on it.
That's a great question, and there's a lot of different caveats to that, and John and I will answer that off the air. But before we get you out of here, Aaron, I don't know if you were here earlier in the show when we did a question of the night in terms of Brandon LaFell. I mean, do you as a fan now kind of say, the Bengals should have hung on to him, or is it kind of like, hey, you know what, doesn't really matter, they're going to get healthy and they're not missing him too much, they're still 5-3.
As far as like the wide receivers go?
Yeah, just, there's injuries to the wide receiver group, injuries to tight end, and then there's ineffectiveness towards the back end of the wide receiver group. So, maybe having a LaFell in your back pocket to lean on during, when there's a little bit of a lead time, that's kind of where we were going with that question.
Hindsight 2020, I think that it was the right move right at the time because you want to give those young, they'll never develop if they never get the chance. Just sucks that our number one draft pick is always injured. That's just like a crap blow right there. But in hindsight, you could say maybe, but at the time, I think they made the right move. Yeah. I don't know. I just think that you gotta be better at evaluating the talent that you have at that depth because we've known that Cody Core. We've known what we had in those guys because we've had them for multiple years. So if there was a time to go and get somebody we felt could contribute a little bit more on the actual catching the ball part of football, we definitely should have did that. I feel like that's just a little bit of a bad foresight on the coaching to have, if you ask me. But I don't know, just saying. Thank you guys very much. Got my son here. So I'm ready to let you go.
Awesome. Well, we hope that you and your son had a good Halloween. We'll answer your question off the air. Thanks for calling in. Don't be a stranger, buddy.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
All right. I thought that's a really interesting question, John, because the rules against hitting a quarterback now, that's interesting. Also, pass happy league, and a lot of teams are getting the ball out so quickly that it's almost like the emphasis is on able linebackers and defensive backs. I think there's always going to be use for a Geno Atkins guy, the smaller, quicker guy that can penetrate and get after the quarterback. But, maybe the Andrew Billings guys, the big, run stuffer, whatever, are becoming a little passe. What did you make of that question from caller Aaron there?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the modern game of football is trying to attack the modern Bengals linebacker, which is slow and lethargic and isn't able to cover. So, yeah, those guys are obviously going to be liabilities. But, pressure is king, and Geno Atkins will always a 3 technique who can pressure up the middle and collapse the pocket from the inside. That will always have value. But like you said, the average time to throw is, dropping under 2.5 seconds. That's why he's having such a phenomenal season with Indianapolis, is that he's mitigating offensive line issues by getting the ball out quickly. And that's kind of
Dalton is too.
Yeah, Dalton has always done that, and that's always mitigated pressures from his poor center play. But yeah, I think that it comes to a philosophical question of it's better to have dominant cover guys who can cover for those first couple seconds, or dominant pass rushers who can collapse the pocket better. Obviously, if you have both, you'll be fine. But it's almost like it's leaning towards better cover guys over better rushers. But guys like Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, they'll always have value because they are good players, and they'll be able to win one-on-one blocks. And especially with the fact that, college game is transitioning from developing better pass rushers over better offensive linemen. Not many programs are developing offensive linemen who are able to come into the league better, or at a high level. So I do think that quick cover guys are becoming more and more valuable, but pass rushers will always still have that value that they have.
Yeah. And that goes back a little bit to the old school mindset of this franchise and Marvin Lewis. You know, I mean, they're still kind of, they don't mix up a lot of looks up front. They still kind of do that old school base 4-3 defense. Yes, a lot of the times they trot out nickel as their base defense, but you know, a lot of teams in the league do the 3-man front with a lot of different blitzing linebackers and all that kind of stuff, and different edge players to try and create different mismatches up front. And you know, the Bengals don't really do that on their end. But, you know, I think that there is still some value for a Josh Tupou, an Andrew Billings in the AFC North, because the Steelers still like to run the ball a lot. James Conner, you can tell. I mean, Le'Veon Bell is amazing, but James Conner has like 4 100-yard rushing games this year. So, I mean, teams are still getting backs that, you know, that they want to use. Yes, there's going to be more passing, and there is more passing, but the AFC North teams, they all play outdoors. And as this time of year rolls around, weather gets crappy and everybody plays outdoors, and you're going to need you're going to need to lean on the running game a little bit more probably than you did throughout. So having some of those big defensive tackles you need, but I do agree that some of those, that's why A. Billings fell the way he did, right? I mean, 5+ years ago, that's a first-round pick. That's a first-round guy, right? But the league going the way it is, it's like, well, he can only play 1 or 2 downs, and that's it. And, you know, where's the value in that? If you're going to get a first-round guy, you want a guy that can play often. So, interesting point. I thought that's an interesting question there from our listener. We've got a couple more questions queued up, and we'll get out of here, John. A bunch of people asked us this, including Sam Anger, and we'll get to the rest of his tweet in a minute, but I saw it was Sam Anger asked us this. I saw Cincy fan Jungle City in the live YouTube chat asked us this, along with a lot of other people. Now that we're at the midway point, now that we've seen what we've seen, and the Bengals are 5-3, how do you see the rest of it playing out, and do they make the playoffs? What's your prediction here? Now, if you need some help, I'll pull up the schedule because we do know that the Bengals play the Saints next week, which is, yes, it's at home, and yes, it's outdoors, which falls into their favor, but it's one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game in Drew Brees, and he's going up against a defense that is a sieve at this point. So we look here, you have the Saints, pretty tough stretch of games coming up here in the next 5 weeks. You have the Saints at home, you go to Baltimore, you host the Browns, you host the Broncos, and then you are at the Chargers. So those are the next 5 games, and then you got the Raiders, the Browns again, and then the Steelers to end the season. So again, if you kind of want to break the schedule down in chunks, these next 5 games are pretty critical, especially since they're all, with the exception of one, they're all AFC games, and 2 of them are divisional. So that's kind of how the rest of the schedule plays out. Your thoughts? So
I just literally counted on both hands the wins and losses. I kind of, just on logic, 3 wins, 5 losses. Obviously, you know, crazy stuff happens all the time in the NFL, but I was just going off of, you know, Bengals typically do well against the Ravens, but I think that this Ravens team is going to have bad intentions based off of how last game went. I think I think this is the year that they go back to splitting Cleveland, just because of the coaching change might revitalize, you know, what they have going on there. And plus, I'm honestly scared of Baker Mayfield now. Saints, Chargers, Steelers, those are probably all losses because of obviously Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers are great quarterbacks that can, you know, destroy this defense. And at Pittsburgh week 17, there'll be a lot of implications on that. It might get flexed to primetime. We don't know, but I'm going to say, you know, Broncos, Raiders, I think those are basically pencil in the wins at this point and splitting the Browns. So I'm going to say floor is 8 wins right now. And I would say best case is probably 10, and that's what they're going to need to get into the playoffs. So I guess the middle ground there is 9 wins. So I'm going to say, 8 or 9, and I'm going to say they just miss it, but that's going off of just basically like what the teams are on paper, what the quarterbacks are on paper, what the team is right now. Unless they show things that are drastically different, more consistency on offense, just a better overall philosophy on defense, I don't think they're going to win one or two of the games that they need to win, and that's why they'll probably fall 1 or 2 games short.
Yeah, I could totally see how you see them going 3-5 because you look at it, they have terrible success against the Steelers. I agree with you that I think this could be a year where they split with the Browns. I'm not as high on Baker Mayfield as you are, but I think that the Browns defense is scrappy. And weather gets bad. Who knows what's going to happen in those 2 games. I think they could split that. I think Denver should be a win. I think they can take Baltimore again. I mean, they have good success against Baltimore. So I see like 4 wins.
Yeah.
And there might be one that they drop where you're like, dude, really? But they also get one, maybe at Chargers, maybe it's the Ravens, maybe it's the Steelers. I see 9 wins, and I see that Week 17 game probably meaning something.
For sure.
And I think, given what's transpired and however the outcome is, I do think if it's 9-7 and the Bengals are fighting for their playoff lives in Pittsburgh, and the Steelers are doing the same, I don't like those odds. But I do see that being the case. I think the Bengals probably go into that week with 9 wins and maybe needing to win to get in or what have you. So I will say 9-7 at this point, maybe barely missing the playoffs, potentially a wild card because the conference is kind of weak. But I see probably four wins in here. I hope actually it's the one against, at least one of them is against the Chargers because I'm going to that game. So I would like to see them win, but I say 4 wins, 9-7. They'll sniff the playoffs, maybe, especially if that last game comes down to it, especially if it gets flexed into prime time. Oh boy! So that's where I'm at. We've got a lot of questions. We got a lot of questions on that, and we'll see. James Napke says NBC will flex the final game against the Steelers. Bengals will get slaughtered. They'll still squeak in the playoffs, but lose a wild card game against the Steelers again. Wow. Poly positive right there.
But it's so freaking likely, though.
It totally is. It totally is. It totally is. I mean, that's yeah. But, we've said this before in this program, John, those are the teams that you need to beat in order to do anything in the league. You got to beat the Steelers. You got to beat the Chiefs. You got to beat the Patriots. I mean, if you ever want to be a championship team, those are the teams that you need to beat. And hopefully this feast or famine team becomes a little more feast than famine over the next stretch of the 8 games. And hopefully they work out a lot of stuff over the bye week. One more question, and you mentioned it a little bit, John, but one more question we're getting a lot of in the live YouTube chat and everything is about Hue Jackson. Hue Jackson was just, for those who have been living under a rock, Hue Jackson was just let go as the Cleveland head coach. Obviously has major ties to Marvin Lewis and the Cincinnati Bengals. One of the most successful offenses the Bengals franchise has ever seen was under Hue Jackson in 2015. Unfortunately, Andy Dalton got hurt that year. We all know how that season ended. And so on and so forth. We did see a lot of creativity that year out of the offense, which was kind of cool. But you look at it and he's out there. It's funny. I think he's going on First Take on Friday morning. So he goes from being fired on Monday morning to going to, I think Adam Schefter said he's fired Monday morning and now he's going to go on ESPN Friday morning. But look, he's not going to be a guy to replace Bill Lazor. Bill Lazor's done some good things this year. If you're looking at an offensive coordinator, I think most people would say, position assistant, offensive quality control. I don't know, some position for him. Is there a fit for him here, or is it just like, dude, let's move on. Let's, Marv, love you, Hugh, but let's just move on. Or could he bring some value as a position coach, as an assistant, that sort of thing?
If he steps into Hamilton County, I'm throwing hands. He's a perpetual liar out of the Bengals organization. Just today, he said, I wanted Wentz, Watson, and Mahomes. Browns would have been winning had we had done it my way year one. The dude is a liar. The dude, I can't stand him. And Hard Knocks really validated all my freaking hatred for this man. Keep him away. All right. The dude was 336-1 as the Browns head coach. And I know people were talking about him bringing us as a consultant or as an assistant. The guy started off like after he got fired from the Ravens, he started off as like a secondary assistant. Then he worked his way up to the offensive coordinator. And then had he had stayed, he was going to be the next head coach of this team. So I don't get how just him being here as like a low level responsibility guy is not going to have an impact on the future. I think that he has a legit relationship with Mike Brown, and if he gets back into the organization, he becomes the primary candidate to take over for the team as soon as Marvin Lewis leaves, and that is the exact opposite of what I want to happen if Marvin Lewis ever decides to give it up. Keep him away. Some other team just pick him up or hire him as a janitor or whatever. I don't want him to be part of here at all, and I could not say that enough.
That is probably the most emotionally charged John Sheeran I've ever seen on this program, and it's about Hue Jackson of all things. Hey, you're not wrong. You're not wrong about a lot of stuff. And God knows how dysfunctional Cleveland is. We said they may take one from the Bengals in this next stretch here, but God knows how dysfunctional they are. And the thing they can hang their hat on the most is the Kevin Costner movie at this point from a couple of years ago. That's the most positive thing they've got going for them. So I'm going to say this about Hue Jackson. I agree. He does not need to be with the Bengals. There's not really a place for him at this point anyway. But I will say this, and this is a prediction, and it may be a lazy prediction, and it may be a geographically based prediction, but I believe that Hue Jackson will return to USC in some capacity, whether it's an offensive coordinator, head coach, that sort of thing. Clay Helton there is on the hot seat. T. Martin, who college football fans probably remember him, was an outstanding quarterback at Tennessee. He is the offensive coordinator and has come under major scrutiny. USC is in transition, but they're also underachieving this year. So I think Hue Jackson, where he was there with Carson Palmer, I think Hue Jackson probably returns there in some capacity, offensive coordinator, head coach, something, or somewhere in the Pac-12 in general. I just think he's going to go to the college level if he wants to continue coaching. I think that's where he's going to go. But, there's not a place for him here. There's not a place for him in Cincinnati. And maybe Marvin will get creative and cute with finding something for him, but I don't see it. And I don't see a need for it. Unless he wants to divulge all of the Browns' secrets this year and their game plans to the Bengals, then so be it. But I don't see that happening. Thanks for all of the questions and everything, guys. Sorry we couldn't take many calls this week. We kind of ran up against it and got a little swamped here and ran a little long. But we appreciate you joining us on this bye week. We appreciate your questions. Get this show on all of the platforms we have mentioned: iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Art19, CincyJungle.com, YouTube. Get the show, listen to it. We appreciate it, and tailgate with it. I wanted to end on this, John. I didn't get to say all of Sam Anger's tweet because it's pretty cool. He sent the questions for you and I. His question essentially was the 10-6 narrative and how does the season end? But he also said, keep up the cracking work, lads. You've been a huge part of my Fridays in the morning and on the way to work for quite some time now. Guaranteed great analysis and depth as always. Greetings from the UK, gentlemen. I mean, that's rad. That's just rad. That this show means something to somebody, so far, literally thousands miles away from where I live, and pretty much the same for you. So, pretty stoked on that. Thanks for the questions, Sam, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Any final thoughts before we get out of here? Enjoy the bye week, buddy.
Oh, I'll be feet kicked up, watching something that doesn't matter. I'll enjoy it. I can't wait.
Good, yeah, me too. It'll be a nice reprieve. Like I said, not only we get to kind of kick back a little bit, both work wise, but just also give the ticker a break. Oh my gosh, this team just. They got us on pins and needles all the time, so we'll see. But this season's been far more enjoyable. This first half of the season has been far more enjoyable than the previous two seasons. Some could call it a surprise. Some could call it, hey, that's exactly what I thought. Whatever. But and they're on pace to potentially make the playoffs this year, so we'll see what happens. A lot more enjoyable football that the Bengals are providing for us this year, and we hope you're enjoying that and this program. We'll see you next time. This is the Orange and Black Insider. For John Sheeran, I'm Anthony Cosenza. See you next episode.